Right then, let's quiet down, shall we? For today's lecture, we're going to be discussing George Washington. To understand a person, I've always found it helpful to know what others, his friends, even his enemies, have said about him. And there's no better description than how he was addressed. His Excellency. Isn't that wonderful? But rather than being just a polite bit of puffery, it's true, he really was excellent in just about every respect. Courage, character, most importantly, leadership. To his own nation, Washington was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. To his enemies, like King George III, he was the most distinguished of any man living, perhaps the greatest character of the age. Remember, this is from his enemy, a king who believed he ruled by divine right, who lost a war to Washington. Some quick facts you need to know. George Washington was born in 1732 in the then British colony of Virginia. During the French and Indian War, he was commissioned as a lieutenant colonel, and in one terrible battle, he had 2 horses shot out from under him and 4 bullets ripped through his coat. Consider that. To have 1 horse shot out from underneath him means he went back to get a second and had that one shot out from underneath him too, not to mention the 4 bullets ripping through his jacket. That's courage, boys and girls. After the war, Washington understandably wanted to lead a quieter life. He married and settled down to a planter's life at Mount Vernon. But under the British economic system of mercantilism, Washington and others felt their labors were being exploited and decided to act. After the opening skirmishes of the Revolutionary War at Lexington and Concord, the Second Continental Congress unanimously elected George Washington to be commander-in-chief. And for 8 grueling years, he led and held together the Continental forces, all without pay. There is more about the war in the reading, but I want you to consider this. After being victorious, after staking his very life to the cause, George Washington went home, with an entire army at his command and a nation within his grasp. He rejected the temptation to seize power and just went home. That, my dear children, is character. His retirement from public life was short-lived, however. The nation was struggling under the Articles of Confederation, and a new government was formed. In the first election for president under the Constitution, George Washington was again unanimously elected. Unanimously? Imagine that today! After 2 terms, Washington again did something unprecedented. He relinquished power again. Remember, at this time there were no term limits, no 22nd Amendment. He could have served for life. But he chose, once again, to transfer power peacefully back to the people. In 1799, His Excellency died of a throat infection. That, believe it or not, may have been contracted because he felt it rude to keep guests waiting and refused to take off his wet clothes after a ride in the rain. Talk about Southern hospitality. Right, let's talk about leadership for a moment, too. Each time there was a call for someone to lead, they turned to Washington. To lead the army, to head the Constitutional Convention, to become the first president of the United States. Before I send you off to do your reading, I want you to consider one last thing. Some of the smartest people in the world at the time, and arguably since, regarded George Washington as their superior. Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and many more. So if we were to define Washington by the company he kept, God, what a man! What a leader! Okay, students, off you go. Do the reading and take the test. And remember, don't think of studying as a task. Knowledge is like money for the mind. Gather it eagerly and share it generously.